Today, I share with you a review of year 2 of my efforts in regenerating this backyard. I'm only sorry that I missed the opportunity to share with you aerial footage of the garden when it was at its greenest and full of blooms after the winter rains. I report back now in the hottest, driest part of summer. In this episode, I would like to focus on telling you about the amazing things I've discovered and observed since my last update. You can find an update on the first year of progress under episode 8. I am amazed at all the resources that I had at my disposal, despite the fact that this land was so degraded, polluted, and bare. Of course, surprisingly, my primary resource in regenerating this land was, ironically, alien invasive species of plants, shrubs, and trees. I had I think it's called Coleus barbatus or Plectranthus barbatus, that was popping up everywhere, and it's a great green material. Its leaves are huge and soft, and it chipped very well, went through the chipper very well. My little antique wood chipper, which I named Metamorphosis, has been a lifesaver to help convert the biomass from these plants, shrubs, and trees into smaller chips to be useful for mulch and covering the land. The Brazilian pepper tree that we chopped down eventually was right in the middle of the property at the bottom, and it was shading everything over, and I had to let it go. There still is one other massive Brazilian pepper that I haven't yet chopped down. It's providing habitat for birds, and it's being foraged by hundreds of bees when it goes into flower. And it's also providing us with protection from the northwester in the extreme winter storms. So it's a bit of a catch-22. We managed to put in a large rain tank, but still need to sort out proper rainwater distribution. I don't yet have the beds worked out, not yet really planting food crops yet on the left where I plan to make the food garden. This side of the garden has taken longer to figure out, and I'm still strategizing what would be best to do on the side where, and on the other hand, on the right-hand side of the property, the indigenous fynbos patch has been coming on nicely, although a bit slow. Because I didn't buy large plants, I mainly got cuttings from the house where we used to live, and I also got some cuttings or small sprouting plants from neighbors and friends, and a few small plants that I bought from local nurseries. Of those, the pelargoniums have taken off beautifully. All of them are happy and have flowered already once at least, and some are still in flower. I have a Wilde Els, a African wormwood plant that's just skyrocketed in growth recently. And finally, after a third attempt, wild rosemary is now successfully growing. Some small lavender plants, which I got from a neighbor, are not doing so well, and I will probably need to move them. I managed to plant in 2023 3 more trees, 1 clementine and 2 varieties of lime, a Tahiti Bears lime and a Thai lime. And all the trees so far, including the bay leaf tree that I planted in 2022, the year that we arrived in the autumn, all of them are still alive and doing well, although not growing fast at all. But I'm keeping a close eye on them to ensure they're going to be okay. Surprisingly and amazingly, after I grew the cover crops on either side, out of the blue, an amazing grass just took over so well, and this grass amazingly happens to be South African grass that they call Durban grass or Berea grass, though it's native to KwaZulu-Natal province of South Africa. It's a low maintenance grass, very good for erosion control, and we're on the slope with the loose soil, and one of my biggest challenges has been the erosion, and that was another reason reason for me to get whatever I can growing here. I also allowed the weeds to take over because don't even think they should be called weeds. They're incredible pioneer plants, resilient plants that move in first to degraded land to help restore it and protect it. And of course they did. They moved in and they did what they needed to do, each one having a different function. And I hope to be doing a whole series of videos on what I've learned and witnessed about these wonderful plants and how they've helped me. They've been my workers, my laborers, where I had no help. They were there for me. Not only that, they are food plants and medicinal plants as well, most of them. And although I haven't made use of them the last 2 years because I'm still getting this land right, it's still quite polluted and I'm not really harvesting food from it much now. The wonderful hedge that borders the property at the bottom and the bottom sides. It is also an alien invasive, but I can't bring myself to removing it just yet. It is a brilliant habitat for small creatures and birds, and it's providing such protection from the wind and pollution from surrounding properties. It's also providing protection from a night light so that this property still remains a bit of a refuge for nocturnal creatures that prefer not to have so much night light, and of course from the dust. It's been really helpful, and at the moment I'm just managing it, trying to top it off, trim it before it goes to seed, and planning ahead to have it eventually replaced by trees and other shrubs that are indigenous. But will be, a process, and I might have it that I remove one and then another one and then the last one. I think I have 3 or 4 different plants that is made up of the hedge that's growing down there. And of course when I harvest that, it's of course more biomass for wood chipping as well as wood for firewood. The right-hand side, where I have the indigenous fynbos garden that's busy establishing itself and growing. What has been so amazing actually throughout the property in the back is I'm on this mountainside in southern Africa, and it's fynbos territory, and I'm just loving how every now and again something pops up that's indigenous and incredible plants that I want here and that I hope will remain here, and they just pop up by surprise wherever they want to be. And of course I will allow them to be exactly there and encourage that sort of growth coming up, especially for that side where I'm trying to keep the garden according to sort of a wild landscape as it should be. I've also found it interesting how some plants are popping up that are food plants that the baboons forage on. For example, the one is a blackberry that's in the nightshade family, and the other is the so-called weeds that people call it a weed, and they call it ankies, which is tiny little sort of onion-like plants that have the most fragrant blossoms and this beautiful sweet nutty flavored little onions that they produce, clusters of onions under the ground near rocks. And I've personally seen how the baboons dig them out and enjoy them as food in this garden. Of course, we also have alien invasive seedlings popping up all the time, and it's absolutely fine because I know what they look like and I'm managing the property, and as soon as I see them popping up, I pull them out, because that's the best time to tackle those sort of plants, is when they're just coming up. Very easy just to pull them, and then you don't have a problem whatsoever. I have a bit of a love and hate relationship with the Brazilian pepper trees. I have one big one left in the back now, and they say that some people have a reaction to working with the wood, and I've worked with it so much and chipping it and chopping it, and I just actually take the leaves and the young shoots and the seeds, and I just love to sort of press them in my hands so that I can smell the divine peppery smell that they produce. It's like a aromatherapy. It honestly is. It's a mood lifter, but at the same time, it has allelopathic properties, which means it inhibits growth of other plants around it. And I'm needing to do more research to find out if this applies to the biomass that is wood chipped and lying on the ground. Although for now I'm using it as wood chips in pathways where I don't really want anything growing anyway, so there's no way I'm not going to use it. Everything on this property I'm using, reusing, and it's a circular system. Pollution, yeah, the things that I've been uncovering, when I arrived, I saw all the signs of, all the snails that were dead, bleached shells. Snails, you don't kill easily. They often hibernate in their shells over the long, hot summers and survive them. And of course, the previous man that lived here did a lot of work, and at one point I just found a whole bunch of plastic shavings, tiny plastic shavings that I dug out one by one in the soil. And of course, building rubble. Problem with building rubble is it's kind of like aggregate cement, but it starts crumbling into a powder, and depending on the uses of that material for building purposes, there's different additives and often a lot of nasty chemicals that you don't want to mix in with your soil. So I am removing the building rubble, but I feel responsible for it. I'm not going to take it somewhere else, and so far I've just been collecting it in buckets. And interestingly, a new development is that when I offloaded one of these buckets recently, I discovered there was a family of geckos, I think it was rock geckos, living in this bucket along with a lot of ants. I have a feeling that this building rubble created a habitat for geckos, and geckos are a friend of mine on this property. They're great controllers of pests, a variety of different pests, and are even resident in my worm farm where they take care of the fruit flies. I'm now going to create spaces where I have this building rubble that I've unearthed and can use it for them as a habitat. So it's actually a surprise for me that there's a good news to the end of this building rubble that I'm unearthing. I found just pockets full of plastic garbage buried in the ground, and I just unearthed it, and tiny little shavings of plastic bags and stuff that I'm collecting now as well, and I'm responsible for that too. I'm not removing it from the property. My aim is to try to make an art piece out of it, because I'm not going to be sending it to another part of the earth to pollute. Of course, you'll see the brick pavers that I made a path with, and that is from another part of the property, upcycle. That's also being reused and also used for borders on beds. But the initial beds I've created on the right-hand side of the property, in the fynbos side, I will eventually remove them and replace them with wood borders because the pavers are too hot. And not only that, my intention on the fynbos side of the garden is that I'm going to start planting plants in areas outside these defined beds, because I want it generally to be a wild space with only small pathways in between to walk through. So ultimately the whole area will be planted with fynbos vegetation, hopefully. The left-hand side where I plan to grow, the top section, you'll see that row of retaining blocks. It's just a single row that I had to put in there. You'll remember from a previous episode where I explained how the earth is a bit higher there, and because it's so loose and there was just a small row of rocks preventing it from tumbling down with the rain, I decided I needed to put proper retaining blocks there just to prevent that erosion. In addition to that, just behind the retaining blocks in that upper bed, so to speak, I planted hen and chicken plants. There's some grasses, clump type grasses already growing. They're brilliant for erosion control. And of course, the other plants I'm using for erosion control is the wild garlic, which I've planted close to 100 plants, as well as just the grasses. The grasses are growing and I'm letting them because they are doing such an important job of holding the soil together and reintroducing life into the soil. I know from my past experience of living at Ridge Road, once I have things quite a bit more improved, All I need to do is create beds right on top of the grass if I want to, by suffocating the grass, and I will then be able to plant very successfully, provided there's not too many rocks wherever I do it. There was a bougainvillea growing at the bottom of the property where I've now planted a clementine tree in its place, and I couldn't believe it. It's a fully grown bougainvillea bush, which was very difficult to take out, and I managed with some help to transplant it to closer to the house by the pergola, with the intention that it will grow up over the pergola and be sort of a beautiful covering shade plant. And it's still alive, and I think after, when the next winter comes, it's going to take off and possibly start getting some new shoots. Right at the bottom of the property, over the many years, I've explained before that the rocks have sort of been sliding down the hill underground and created this sort of ditch where the water would flow through. And I, with all the extra biomass and branches I had left over, I decided to put the branches in this ditch and sort of try and do a hugelkultur bed, although I didn't really have enough earth to cover it and to make a proper mound. But it's a start, and I managed to tightly pack in a lot of biomass in there, and whenever I get a bit of spare soil, I top it up. And I've already grown lentils as well as borage on this little mound, and just to provide some sort of living thing growing on it and some blooms for foragers. It's a starting point, and I hope to add to it and make it a proper hugelkultur bed when I have the resources to do so. Just as I had hoped, a patch of red clover returned in the winter months, and I also had thrown down some white clover seeds, and a couple of patches of that came up as well. This is a plant that I want to come back every year, and it will, because it's a plant I have a connection with and that I use for my infusions. Some more free resources that I want to tell you about is the rocks. The rocks on this mountain have been phenomenal. They've inspired me to even write a poem about them. They are holding this mountain together, so I'm very grateful for them. But when it comes time to dig a hole to plant something, it is a huge challenge, because I end up getting more rock out of that hole than earth. But the rocks are also there to be a resource for me for all sorts of things. Of course, fallen leaves have been really a lifesaver as well from all the trees I'm very fortunate that we have. So the leaves, I use them for mulch as well. I don't yet have enough green material to be making a compost heap, but now that I've got grass growing, I intend to have my first compost heap during or after the next winter, especially if I can get neighbors to assist me with any sort of material they might be willing to give me, provided that they don't use pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, or fungicides on their property. Then, of course, there are the carob pods that fall from the carob tree which we have on this property. We have two trees, and the one is producing the fruit and the other is I think it's female and male. And these pods are just phenomenal. I mean, first of all, as far as I know, the carob tree is a nitrogen fixing tree, and the pods are not only a food source for humans, chocolate substitute of sorts, although I'm not yet using it for that purpose. I need a little more experience. And for now, I'm using it to give back to the earth, as I'm doing with almost everything growing is put back into the earth for now until there's some sort of recovery and a life regenerating, so that once the soils are living, then I will once again be receiving back from the earth. For now, it's very much a giving game to give back to the earth, and these carob pods are great for that. It's almost like a slow release fertilizer that I put into the beds. Sometimes I break them apart, sometimes I put them in whole, and they often do sprout up and little seedlings like other trees that I don't want coming up, but I just tackle them as and when they come up, because I'm now pretty good at identifying whatever little seedlings are popping up and know which ones I need to terminate. Then, of course, there is another resource that I'm very blessed to be receiving, and that is very well composted horse manure from someone I know personally that has her own horses and feeds them well and does not use pesticides on her property. And this has introduced so much life into this garden already as well, because this horse manure, when it arrives, it's so well composted, and it's contains all sorts of living organisms like the roly-polies that help with removing heavy metals, and of course beautiful healthy earthworms and so on. So this I add to the garden, not in the fynbos section, but more the food growing side and the other areas where I think it could be used.